Oh shit, 5-0. This is the world according to Jen and Carolyn.
All right, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about weed. And full disclosure, this is our second take. We initially thought, hey, I think it's only appropriate that we do this episode under the influence of marijuana. But my God, you guys, it was
Were we high when we thought of that?
Possibly.
It was a hot mess.
Most nights I am high. Huge proponent of recreational marijuana use. We'll get into that. But yeah, it was an absolute mess. If we ever at any point have like a paid subscription page, you will get that nugget of fucking, I don't even know what to call it. It was a goddamn mess.
But
so yeah,
hilarious.
It was hilarious.
It had its moments.
Yeah, not for public consumption.
No.
Not necessarily what we were going for. So, we're going to talk about weed. And here's the deal. It used to be bad. When we grew up in the 80s and the 90s, weed was totally and completely vilified. Just ask Sally Jesse Raphael, Phil Donahue, or any of the other talk show hosts that we talked about in the Jerry Springer episode. It was often called stupid things like a gateway drug. There were phrases popularized like, the first one's always free. I just want to go on record here and say, anytime I've bought weed, including the first time, nothing was free. You always had to pay for your drugs. Anyway, Carolyn, I think we should start by talking about your initial experience with the pot.
So, Jen, I went to West Portal Lutheran School. It's a small Lutheran school off 19th and Sloat. Very academic. My interpretation, it was very goody-goody, although maybe I was just the only goody-goody, but it felt there were no bad kids in quotes, right? And this is kind of interesting. My cohort, that class of when you were born in 1982, you were the class of 2000. And we realized this in fifth grade because this anti-drug campaign called the Smoke-Free Class of 2000 was marketed to us. It was mostly nicotine-based, but, they did all the range of, the table of drugs.
Because nicotine and heroin are totally on the same level.
The same. Yeah. It's a gateway drug, right? Yeah. So, and there's a hilarious song. I went back and looked at it. It's really
cute. We'll post it in the show notes.
I still can sing. I'll sing the whole song along with it. But it's funny, the first thing that my friend and I did after that week-long education about drugs was we kind of like sat down on Friday. I was like, man, I really fucking want a cigarette. And like, I kind of want to try some drugs.
All it does is pique your curiosity. That kind of education.
We were like, what is this? Oh, cool. So anyway, so I was pretty much too pure for most things, I think, and too afraid and risk adverse. But I did try. I know, totally. I tried the weed my freshman year at Mercy High School. I was about 14. My dear friend, her older sister lived on her own down in the Castro.
It's always the older sibling.
Always the older sister. We got some Bammer shake, and we got really high, and we went to San Francisco Center, and then I got Panda Express, and I remember being like, this is the best food I've ever had in my life.
Oh, yeah.
I don't actually think I paid for any weed for the most part, and you were actually a huge source. You never made me pay for weed. You were very sharing.
Yes.
But until my late 30s, I think actually till pandemic. Is when I really started officially buying
that street. That is an incredible street.
I'm a scrub.
You are. So
my endless love to those who supplied. If you're listening, you're a supplier. Thank you.
Hey, Scarface said it best. Don't get high on your own supply, bro. That was a mountain of cocaine, though. So anyway, I went to public school. So my experience with drugs and alcohol was a lot different and happened a lot earlier. We were basically huffing keyboard cleaner in the bathroom in 8th grade. Oh, yeah. I could have been a Mensa member if not for all the shit I did to my developing brain. Anyway, not advocating for that at all. But I think it's important to mention that the first time I tried weed was when I was 12. It was that like brown shake garbage. You have to pick out the stems and the seeds. Nasty. But I'm fairly certain, if I remember correctly, it was my good friend's older cousin. And he bought it for us. So I didn't try green weed until I think it was like 13 or 14. And like you, I grew up low income. That was the reason I never bought weed. So I relied on people to get me high. I was like Snoop Dogg and Half Baked. Yes. Anytime someone fired up a joint, I'm like, hey, what's up, guys? Coming out the cuts. So that was my my experience with weed. And I think you probably remember this, even though you were a goody-goody.
Yeah.
But the code for smoking weed was 420. Yeah.
I put that on my backpack, and the principal was like, do you know what that means? And I was like, it's my birthday, which it isn't. But
that's hilarious.
420.
Yeah, because they don't have that information on file or anything.
Or JanSpot.
Oh, JanSpot. Yeah, you had to tag your JanSport backpack.
Yeah.
That was like required.
Yes.
So 420, we all knew that it was a number associated with getting high. Most folks, I don't think necessarily know where it comes from. A lot of people would say, oh, it's cop code for smoking in progress. That's what I always thought it was. That's not the case. Is it Hitler's birthday? Yes, it is, but it would be incredibly unchill to associate weed and Hitler, right? So where does it actually come from? So like most awesome things, it has its origin in the Bay Area. The most credible story traces 420 to Marin County, which is right north of San Francisco. In 1971, 5 students at San Rafael High School, it's not Rafael, god damn it, would meet at 420 by the campus statue of chemist Louis Pasteur to partake. They chose that specific time because extracurricular activities had usually ended by then. This group consisted of Steve Capper, Dave Reddix, Jeffrey Noel, Larry Schwartz, and Mark Gravich. And they became known as the Waldos because they met at a wall to get high.
That's awesome.
Very creative. They would say 420 to each other is code for marijuana. And so they, Time quoted one of the guys as saying, like, we didn't want to hang out with the jocks. We were tired of that Friday night football scene. We were the ones smoking a doobie underneath the bleachers.
I can relate to that.
I can as well. Yeah. Every opportunity to escape from an assembly, especially a sports-related one, my group of friends and I would take. We would hop the fence that bordered our school, our high school, and the cemetery, and we'd go, as goth kids do, and kick it in the cemetery and get high. It was awesome.
We were drama, theater, tech kids, too. Yeah. So you were kind of anything counterculture by high school, I was into.
We were all bonded by weed.
Yeah.
And so... for the history of marijuana itself and using it for both recreational and medicinal purposes, let's go all the way back to 2900 BC. The Chinese emperor Fu Shu, the Chinese actually credit him with bringing civilization to China. He references something called ma. It's the Chinese word for cannabis. More meatloaf. And so, yes, that was a popular medicine that possessed both yin and yang. That's fucking dope. Mm-hmm. Literally. 1213 BC, Egyptians used cannabis for glaucoma, inflammation, and enemas.
I want a weed enema.
I'll get my weed enema right after we're done recording. I'll probably mess it up. Also, in BC times, we moved from the Middle East to India and Greece. And so 30 AD, Jesus possibly used weed. I don't know. There's some references to that. The Christ does mean the anointed one. And somebody named Bennett, you might have to help me because you have a Catholic education.
I have no idea who Bennett is.
No idea. Contends that Christ was anointed with chrism, a cannabis-based oil that caused his spiritual visions. I think Christ was definitely hallucinating. I don't know if it was induced by cannabis, but anyway. 1600s, William Shakespeare may have smoked cannabis, to which I say, no shit.
No shit.
Yeah, 1611 through 1762, the Jamestown settlers brought it here, and they were using hemp fiber and exporting that. And then George Washington grew hemp, THC included. 1911, Massachusetts became the first state to outlaw cannabis. Boo! And basically from 1911 on, it was just an all-out legislative war on marijuana. Yeah. In 1936, you saw the movie Reefer Madness come out. If you haven't, you gotta see it, dude. Is
that like Dragnet?
No, it's old-timey. It's awesome. It's like...
1936.
Yeah, 36.
Whoa.
It's like a cautionary tale on steroids. So it's the morality tale of how reefer addiction ruins
the reefer.
Nobody. Maybe in 1936 you did. Ruins the life of its young protagonist and gets a lot of other people killed, sexually compromised, and committed to lunatic asylums. Never happened to me or anybody I know, unless they had underlying issues. So everyone was pretty much smoking weed in the 60s.
Duh.
We know that. That's awesome. It was still categorized as a controlled substance with no medical purpose. And then, in 1970, an organization called NORML was created. And NORML is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. NORML is awesome. 1986, we had a lot of anti-drug abuse, or the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which came out during the Reagan administration, the war on drugs. Bunch of bullshit. Yeah, we try to say fuck Reagan in every episode where appropriate, because it's always appropriate to say fuck Reagan as far as we're concerned. But we're communists. So slowly we're actually starting to see more doctors and scientists say, hey, there is a medical benefit here. I can tell you firsthand, I was in severe pain the week before last with 2 bulging discs in my neck and a pinched nerve running down my arm. And I wasn't using cannabis exclusively to manage the pain, but it was part of my pain management plan in the evening. And then I would also drink a CBD-based drink that was like 25 milligrams of CBD. And I have to say, it would take the edge off pretty well. Yeah. It worked. It definitely worked. And so, you know, as of April 20th, 420, 20 states and the District of Columbia and Guam, I believe, have legalized weed for recreational use, while 27 states allow for it for varying medicinal purposes, though it's still illegal at the federal level, which is stupid. So, Carolyn, I feel like it's time to take, really
it's
dumb.
Just stupid.
It is stupid. That's simplistic overview of how I feel about federal legislation. So anyway, Carolyn, I think it's time to delve into a quick science break.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how marijuana affects the brain? Remember that This Is Your Brain on Drugs ad?
Oh, the egg?
The egg. Any questions?
I'm hungry.
Yeah, there was also one where somebody like destroyed their kitchen and just started smashing plates with baseball bats. Oh, that might have been meth. I lost me to meth.
I like the one with the dad where he's like, he walks in with a bag of weed and he's like, I can't believe this. He's like, where'd you get this? He's like, I got it from you. And then the dad like looks and he's like, fuck.
It's going to be our kid. For sure. So anyway, give us the science behind this.
Let's start at the beginning, because there is a medical reason that you did feel an opioid-like relief in your body. And so I want to teach you the science of this. So we're going to start as well way at the beginning, at birth. When you're born, the human brain, healthy human brain, is equipped with billions of neurons, and neurons grow wild. Neurons are our ability to make synapses and connect, all is fun, and that makes me happy, right? So these neurons grow wild. They're expansive networks, think like a jungle. And as we grow and we experience life and nature, nurture dependent, of course, this jungle of neurons creates synapses, which make connections. And as you get better and more efficient at things, it's a mechanism called pruning. And if you're like gardening, we're white ladies, we should probably, in our 40s, we should probably like gardening. Yes. Pruning's a whole thing, and think of it the same way. Think of pruning like cutting down pathways in that neuron jungle, and the paths that get taken consistently become more efficient, and they continue to get pruned, and then they get myelinated, which is like wrapping a protective coating around a bunch of wires. And if this path isn't taken, it just grows over and it isn't used. So I learned how to play the piano, but I didn't like it. I like dance better. The pruning path towards learning music kind of had its moment.
I didn't put in my 10,000 hours.
No, I sure didn't.
Nothing got myelinated here, man.
the guide to shaking my ass got really myelinated. So
the twerking synapses
got way myelinated. So anyway, this is a good thing, and exposing young brains to lots of things, allowing your child to have pruning. This is a good thing. It reinforces. If you don't use it, you lose it. All right. So in the United States, 18 is considered the legal age of adulthood, but science is telling us our brain, one, it's not a computer, it's an organism. It's an organ. It's fully changing all the time, it's shifting. And it also isn't fully formed until about 25 for females and 28 to 30 for males.
God, I knew we were more mature.
Well, and you're going to have to factor in all the other social factors that come into play with that, and having privilege as well can shift that. But why that's important is because the developing brain, we need to consider ourselves, we're not really ready to land in the place we're going to land. And so it's important that we give our brain time to develop. Well, we'll get to that later on, but hopefully you're still with me. So I'm getting to the weed part, I promise. So in our brains, we have receptors, that's a lock, and we have what's called an endocannabinoid system of chemicals and receptors. And those are the keys that fit into these receptor locks. Endocannabinoids, there's over 400, I bet that's even higher. Our body makes them naturally. They cover all parts of our body, and they're actually the most abundant in your brain, but you have them throughout every organ of your body.
Okay.
And so they disperse quickly. They're intended to counteract the effects of and the aftermath of the body after a fight or flight situation. So danger, adrenaline. And we have that fight or flight happening. Our body goes, oh shit, a bear. And then we're upset. And then we come down off of that. We feel euphoric. We feel tired. The stress hormone gets cleared away, and that's good. So anandamide is the main neurotransmitter that we're looking at when we're talking about cannabis, because anandamide is Sanskrit for bliss. And when anandamide binds to a receptor, it's that runner's high you experience. It's that feeling you have when you rule at life, when you walk out of a interview and you feel like, I nailed it. Yeah. Exactly. So it's a dope ass molecule. Read lots and lots about it. There's nothing but good shit about this, and it's free. It's in your body. You just have to actually do shit and experience life. Yeah. Jen, what if I could synthesize that molecule and you don't have to do anything? You could lay on your ass.
Hell yeah! As a lazy American, I want the shortcut.
So meet THC, tetrahydrocannabinoid. This is found in weed. It was synthesized by an Israeli chemist in the 1960s. Here's the cool thing. Both THC and anandamide, that neurotransmitter, they both fit into the same key and lock. They're the same key that fits into the lock of that endocannabinoid in our central nervous system and sometimes in our physical nervous system in our body. But the body gets tricked by THC. It's highly potent. It's really strong. It's unregulated in our body. It stays longer than it should.
Oh, yes.
And it's kind of hard to clear. Yeah. Versus anandamide, which is naturally in us, and it just kind of dissipates and our body knows what to do with it. Yeah. So it also, the tricky thing about THC is it releases abnormally high amounts of dopamine. So I get a lot of people, and I myself for a very long time went, I'm anxious, I'm going to smoke. It does make you feel better. It does make my brain stop thinking. However, I get a huge rush of dopamine, and then I actually feel worse the next day because I'm serotonin depleted.
You're crashing, bro.
I'm crashing, and it actually can make some people feel more anxious after or become more dependent on weed. So again, the pros are you feel good, you feel confident, you feel courage, stress reduction, creativity, pain relief. The cons are, there could be some health risks. Anything you put in your body that's foreign, you always have to know what you're doing. It could cause other problems, and you could break laws if you're under 18 or if you have too much on you.
Or live in a state,
or you're a person of color.
Or if you're in Texas. Yeah, totally.
And also addiction.
Yep. So that makes sense. I just remembered a phrase we would use when I would facilitate trauma training. Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Oh, that's right. That is true. I like that one.
Trick we would use.
I like that.
Yeah, get people to remember how the brain works.
So that's why you felt better.
Yes, that makes sense. That makes total sense. So if you're like us, talk a little bit about the Just Say No campaign of the 80s and 90s. So if you're like us, you might remember the Just Say No campaign, which was an advertising campaign prevalent during, as I said, the 80s, early 90s, as part of the U.S.-led war on drugs. Boo! Aiming to discourage children from engaging in illegal recreational drug use by offering various ways of saying no. The slogan was created and championed by Nancy Reagan during her husband's presidency.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nothing's cooler than a white lady in a Chanel pantsuit.
Right, telling you not to do drugs.
With her fresh, tight curls from the barbershop.
Right? Relatable. So, if you don't remember the Just Say No phrase and the corresponding DARE program, let me refresh your memory with a snippet of an article that definitely sums up how I remember DARE. This is from a Guardian article written by Michael McGrath. When police officers came to my semi-rural elementary school in 1990 to deliver an anti-drug message, they played a video clip of Nancy Reagan's 3-word mantra, Just Say No, distributed posters of a drug-sniffing canine police dog, and shared their experiences of scrapping with drug users and dealers, always characterized as a tawdry assortment of losers and bums. They arrived in a black Camaro with DARE, Drug Abuse Resistance Education, scrawled on its side in blazing faux graffiti. One officer explaining how his department had seized this car from a drug dealer. It's so funny. And I just remember being like 8, 9, 10 and being like, wow, am I really supposed to be impressed by this?
Wasn't there a dog? McGruff the crime dog?
That was take a bite out of crime. That was a different 80s slogan.
Okay,
but
sorry.
we had a lot of shit that was ineffective.
We had a lot of cartoons telling us what to do.
Yes, totally. And then there were cartoons for promoting smoking too. Smoking of cigarettes.
Oh,
remember?
Oh my God, you're right.
Was it a monkey or a tiger? It was.
I think it was
Joe Cool. Who was Joe Cool?
The tiger.
Was it a tiger?
I think so.
Yeah.
No, a camel.
Oh, camel. That's right. Jesus, camel cigarettes. Clearly, I tried to smoke cigarettes when I was in high school because I wanted to be cool and impress all the older kids. And so there was a deli across the street from our school. And for like a week straight, I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to use my lunch money to buy a pack of Marlboro Reds.
Oh,
and so
God.
I wasn't eating. I was like 100 pounds and I was smoking Reds at lunch. I just remember going to class and being like, I'm dying. But I did. People loved me because I was giving away free Reds.
You became cool.
I did become cool. Not the way I envisioned, but I think my body is thanking me for my inability to process nicotine. So, DARE was stupid for a lot of reasons, but chief among the reasons why this program failed to resonate with young people is the abstinence-only message. Much like abstinence-based sex education, DARE and Just Say No, all they do really is spread fear and ignorance and propaganda instead of information, placing all the responsibility on the individual when denying them the tools they need to make key decisions. So even Nancy Reagan, 20 years after the campaign, was like, this didn't work. She said, drug criminals are ingenious. They work every day to plot a new and better way to steal our children's lives. It's a shame the anti-drug programs of the period failed to show the same ingenuity when it came to teaching children about the very real dangers of substance abuse.
Well, probably because your husband had the
Iran-Contra, which we'll get into in another episode.
Yeah, he kind of was doing the same thing. The Republicans were kind of doing that too.
Talking out of two sides of their mouth, funding an illegal war with drugs, and at the same time busting people of color in this country. Yeah, we owe Reagan for the crack epidemic too. But again, we have a whole episode coming up on that shit because I could talk about that ad nauseum, and I will. But back to abstinence-only education and lumping all drugs together. It's completely and totally ineffective. And studies are actually showing that drug education that hinges on harm reduction, which is defined as reducing the harm associated with using drugs through a variety of public health interventions, that is what's most effective. And I know you're all dying for me to provide you with an example of a harm reduction drug education lesson. So I give you a segment on cannabis from something called Safety First, which is a new set of 15 lessons created by the nonprofit Drug Policy Alliance. They're a really cool organization. So the lesson starts with the teacher explaining that no matter how cannabis is taken, there are always risks. Cool. Especially for young people whose brains are still developing. And Carolyn's going to talk more to us about that. But then it introduces a scenario. What if someone you know does the drug anyway? Your friend Eddie tells you that he ate a weed brownie 15 minutes ago. The scenario reads, he hasn't felt anything and wants to eat another one. What information and advice would you give him to reduce possible harm?
Wait, Eddie, just wait.
In discussing the scenario, the teacher is instructed to provide basic facts about how cannabis works, including that it might take 45 to 90 minutes for Eddie to feel anything. So they should wait at least 2 hours before eating anything more just to be safe. I mean, I've had a crazy experience with eating edibles. I think we all have.
I can't. No. Edibles are not. Gummies I can do.
Yeah.
Edibles are too hard.
Well, if you put a cookie in front of me and you're
I'll
like,
eat the whole goddamn cookie.
Only take a nibble. I'm like, fuck that shit. Like, it doesn't.
And it's delicious.
Yes. This cookie tastes like weed and chocolate. I am 100% all in here.
Yeah.
So, as far as I'm concerned, I think that's good advice. Also, again, a whole brownie, I would be seeing Jesus. Kids are crazy these days. So, Carolyn, can you tell us from a psychological perspective why harm reduction is effective, especially compared to abstinence-only education? And can we also, just quickly, without sounding like, a Just Say No campaign, quickly touch on how frequent marijuana use might impact the developing teenage brain?
Absolutely. Well, it's like what you mentioned before. Scaring, lecturing, and providing facts only with the incentive of dissuading someone, or abstinence, it's just not, it's not realistic, and so at its most, even a goody like me back in 5th grade who was had the fear of death from her family and religious school telling me Jesus would be really hurt if I ruined my
I
body.
just see Jesus weeping as kids are like smoking a joint.
They told us even if we picked a scab that we were dishonoring Jesus.
Oh my God.
Because that was God's way of like trying to heal our body. So God knows what he would do if I smoked the reefer, right?
Ooh, maybe I'm glad I went to public school.
Yeah, but having curiosity is not abnormal. That's a healthy part of growing.
Yeah.
And what we really want to do is teach, don't lie to kids. Don't tell them things that aren't true. Give them the information and give them the ability to think through something.
Yes.
Now, they may still make a choice that we might say is not necessarily the right choice, but then they also will have to deal with the consequences. And I would much rather a child or a teenager deal with consequences in the safety of their home and adults who hopefully can provide them with that container. And also they may not, and teaching them not to do anything, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, what harm reduction is it's about respecting choice and joining alongside someone in the world, respecting the neuroscience of how they think and how their body survives in spite of how they cope. At its most basic, where you see this coming up a lot is like harm reduction would be, hey, if you're going to use needles to inject heroin, let's at least provide clean needles.
Yes.
And obviously, that's very controversial because people are going to go, well, just don't do heroin.
Right.
Well, okay. However,
it's not realistic.
It's not realistic and you are going to do it. And there's far more public health things that are going to happen and more harm that's going to happen to that person if they use a dirty needle than if they have a proper place to throw it away and they can get new ones. Yep. I personally do not have a problem with that. Yep. I understand where a lot of people are coming from a very ignorant space or not knowing any better. So I love to talk about Lisa D'Amour, who's an American clinical psychologist and author of and specialized in the development of not just the teenage brain, but the teenage girl brain, young woman. She reminds us to talk to teens, and I think adults, because most adults kind of are unregulated teenagers half the time, and as well addicts, that we have two sides to us. We have the impulsive side that does dumb shit, and then it's also impulsive, and it can be really immature. It wants power now. It's a part of us that goes, I don't give a shit, I want that cookie, I don't care if I'm on a diet, right? But if you talk to that side, you're going to get a reactive response, and the person's more than likely going to shut down. Yeah. Versus what Lisa goes on to express, that if we talk to teens and adults with this philosophical side, this mature side, this ability to say, hey, you're broad-minded, you're a deeply thoughtful person. And when you communicate with that paired with facts and emotions and empathy, you're going to get a responsive, thoughtful conversation about choices. And if nothing else, you're going to present to that individual, hey, I'm not going to just sit here and wag my finger at you for what you're doing. I'm going to listen to you about all the reasons why you're doing it and what do you think happens when this happens? And do you think these are good things? So for me, I think that pairs really nicely with anyone and it works in line with what harm reduction is. And you meet someone where they're at, you don't take an authoritative militant attitude. And harm reduction is all about letting people wonder and find out on their own, well, what happens when I do the things I do? Does that bring me long-term power or short-term power? Which one do I want? And then you come to that conclusion. That's actually far better. I'm going to teach you how to fish. Rather than coming to me to get fish. So
and also taking into consideration anything that might be, making somebody want to use to take the edge off. Like, have you experienced trauma or something that's making you want to escape, and honoring that and respecting that and maybe finding alternative methods for dealing with that?
Well, you're going to be more likely to have someone want to engage in that conversation with you if you're not taking it. It's kind of like if you're just like, well, then you just shouldn't do that. So I don't know what to tell you.
The absence of judgment goes a long way, man.
I would say. But, again, this isn't liked by a lot of clinicians. I think this isn't really liked by a lot of policymakers. I'm sure if you're in a community where someone's handing out free needles in San Francisco, we do get a lot of people saying, well, I don't want that in my neighborhood. Yeah. Well, okay. But again, it's bigger than that. And so, where I want to be very cautious here that I'm not sounding like a person wagging her finger, but I do get a lot of teens who come in and are using. And it's really important for me to help them understand what I talked about at the beginning. Let me teach you. If you're going to do this, let me teach you what's actually happening. Yes. And do you understand risk? And it's okay that they don't. Yeah. But when you're putting something in a growing body mind, and I include nutrition in that, I include anything that's,
has a potentially
negative
impact.
which is anything. Anything could be good or bad.
Yes.
You could eat a pound of broccoli. That's not good for you. Anyone in the room with you after, at least with me, would tell you that's not a good idea, Carolyn. But anyway, so it's a concern for me, I have to say, from a clinical standpoint and as an adult, that, anything that goes into a growing body or growing mind, when you start to rely on one thing, that's going to cause a problem. And THC is a big key that fits into the lock. And we don't know what the long-term benefit, we do know what the long-term impact of that is. And it takes so much into account. I know people who, they smoked hella and they're now physicians and they had something else going on that kept them going. And I know people on the other side.
Yes.
So there's so many other factors. But I come from a place of, hey, this is what you're going to see. Also, when you come down off of this, when you're telling me you're more anxious or you're more stressed or you're having trouble concentrating or you're not getting things done, I'm going to remind you, I noticed, you smoked a lot of weed. How do you think that's impacting things? Or did you also drink a ton of water? Did you go for a walk? Did you do this? So there's so many other things that go into it that, you want to teach someone also their heredity and their if you come from a family where addiction is a thing or maladaptive coping. Yeah. But also anything in moderation can be healthy and anything in moderation can be unhealthy.
Yeah. We just always want to pay particular attention to the developing brain. When I talk about all of the terrible things I did to my brain and body when I was growing up in regard to drugs, I know through my, my 42-year-old eyes and brain that was, negative and deleterious to my neurological development. And I have a child. He's only 5 right now, so he probably has a good 5 years before he gets into drugs. No, I'm just kidding. Hopefully it's a long time. But anyway, my husband and I are already trying to create an environment where he feels comfortable asking questions.
Yes.
Even if nothing is taboo, actually. In my house, nothing is taboo. And for better or for worse, I have this extensive history with drugs. Yeah. And so when the questions do arise and probably the use, I'm going to be able to engage with him on a very real level and hopefully through a harm reduction lens. I'm probably going to be calling you.
Well, and again, it's also, it's not a therapist's job. And I think parents have a hard time, once your kid's out of your house, you really don't have a total lot of control over what they do or what they don't do. So I tend to align with where you're coming from of, hey, I'm going to give you the information and I'm going to allow you're going to know how I feel about something. You're going to know what the consequences are going to be. You're going to know you don't get to live in our basement and smoke weed all day and be a basement
Get a job, motherfucker.
Yeah. So I'm going to have some expectations. Right. If this is how you choose to do that, me sitting here saying, oh, I don't like that, that's not going to help.
No.
It's not going to create more dialogue. Yeah. And again, as a parent, I think it is your responsibility to create that container.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to check on my kid and we can cut this out. Liam, you okay? Okay. Cool. An example of excellent parenting. All right. So I want to talk, I know we're taking a deep or a sharp turn here, but I want to talk about how weed is pretty much everywhere now, or, almost everywhere. So lay off the weed, kids. But if you're grown, we live in an age and fortunately a place, San Francisco, where you can get weed. I can walk down the street. I can walk 2 blocks and there is a dispensary that I go to that I get my edibles from, or my gummies, because it tells me how much is in each one. 5 milligrams every night to take the edge off. That's what I do. Same. I seldom drink, but I take my weed gummy every night.
Seldom drink. You're full of shit.
I can't anymore. I went out on Saturday. Right. I'll have one here and there, but I went out on Saturday. I had 4 vodka sodas, and yesterday I thought I was dying.
Because of the meds around,
Well, just because I'm old. It just takes so much longer to recover. My sleep is disturbed, whereas with marijuana, I sleep well. I feel great, although there are some studies coming out that say you actually don't sleep well. Bullshit. I wake up feeling refreshed, damn it.
Me too.
So, and we'll talk about alcohol later, which is a much more widely accepted drug compared to marijuana. But I just got to tell you that for me, my preference is 5 milligrams of THC every night. That's how I roll. And again, we live in San Francisco where we have a whole ass city department, the Office of Cannabis, dedicated to cannabis. And a lot of the emphasis there is on workforce development, which I love. So I love our city, but it's not just California. As I mentioned, there are a ton of states where recreational cannabis, or at minimum, medicinal marijuana, is legal. There's been a huge shift over the last 10 years. And I just want to talk briefly about how we got here. So, in November 2020, there was a Pew Research study conducted, found that 88% of U.S. adults are on board with marijuana legalization for either recreational or medicinal use.
Pew, pew, pew.
Yeah,
I have to do that every time.
You really do.
59, I can't help it.
You really can't. 59% say cannabis should be legal for medical and recreational use, while only 10% say it should be legal at all. So, the first time that Gallup gathered this data in 1969, only 12% of Americans were in favor of legal cannabis. We've come a long way. This is an article on The Hill. So 9 years ago, voters in Colorado and Washington became the first to approve recreational marijuana over objections of top Democrats in the state. Unless you thought Democrats were always on board with weed, let me tell you, that wasn't the case. My mom lives in Colorado. That first year, I got to see if they're still coming, but you got a weed check. Like, how in...
She got money?
She got money. You know how in Alaska, they get like surplus money from the oil industry?
No.
It's like tax money or something. Well,
shit, I need to move to Alaska.
I know.
Free money.
I don't think I can handle it, but...
Money, please.
It's always nice to get free money. So yeah, my mom got a weed check, like weed dividends in the mail. And so, this isn't the case anymore that Democrats and Republicans are opposed to weed. Oftentimes, weed bills receive bipartisan support, though there are more Republicans than Democrats who are opposed, but still a lot of bipartisan support. Look at that motherfucker, John Bonner, the former Speaker of the House. He was such an anti-drug asshole, but a lot of this is about money. So now he sits on a board of Acreage Holdings, which is a marijuana investment firm. Motherfucker makes commercials promoting marijuana. Yeah.
Well, you go where the money is.
Exactly.
Succession.
Things have changed. Yes. I got it. I got to watch that.
I'm deep in it.
So pollsters, they really say the sea change is being driven by a generational shift in the electorate. Old folks are dying out, and, millennials and even baby boomers are like, weed's fine.
Yeah.
We grew up with it being,
it's part of the common culture. Too.
Yeah. And then it became recreationally approved. So it's just, we live in different times and
Thank
people
God.
are different. Yeah. And, this woman, Ann Seltzer, who's a pollster who conducts surveys for Des Moines Register and Grinnell College, she credited this shift in public opinion to the increasing prevalence of medical marijuana and the absence of widespread crime driven by broader pot use. There is not, as far as I know, any correlation between, in fact, you're more inclined to sit on the couch. I read a study that said men are less inclined to perpetrate acts of intimate partner violence if they're high.
Versus alcohol.
Versus alcohol.
100% believe that. Well, it's acting on different receptors in your brain.
For sure. It's going to typically mellow you out. I don't know any aggro weed smokers. Let's put it that way. I don't know anybody who smokes weed and is like, I'm going to beat my wife. Like, that's just not something. I'm not trying to diminish how, sad and scary that is. But that just doesn't happen. Yeah. Not that I've seen, unless it's combined with other substances.
Well, we're definitely not functional. I'm not a functional weed person. I know people who can, do shit. Yeah. I'm going to sit now.
Yeah. I like to sit and watch TV. It's amazing. So, there's another reason why there's been this shift in thinking, a more tangible reason. And states dealing with stretched budgets and limited resources, they see the potential for millions more dollars in tax revenue. And every state that has legalized marijuana for recreational use thus far has exceeded revenue expectations in the space of just a few years. This is crazy. This is a Flow article I read. So this was for 2022. It said the marijuana industry will add nearly $100 billion to the economy and nearly $3 billion in retail cannabis taxes. So, I mean, this is just an incredible industry, which, as far as I'm concerned, has the potential to help with stretch budgets, yes, and also aid in workforce development and, get people into a new and lucrative industry.
Well, and it's agriculture-based, too.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. We just have to make sure that it doesn't become too corporate, which is what's happening.
It's totally what we'll do, yeah.
Yeah. which is unfortunate. Support your small growers, man. So as usual, money, or more specifically, the ability to tax the shit out of something, is one of the primary reasons why there has been such a push for legalization of marijuana on both sides of the aisle. But because we pride ourselves on the show on looking at issues through an equity lens, I think we would be remiss if we didn't at least touch on the impact of marijuana arrests in Black and brown communities, as well as how legalization has left a lot of people of color out of this lucrative industry. So let's talk about racial disparities in marijuana-related arrests. So this is from a Normal article. I'm going to give you an example of what's happening in Washington. So I think this is D.C., Washington, D.C., not state. So a 2022 Washington Post analyst determined while marijuana arrests overall dropped in the year since Virginia became the first state in the South to legalize, Black adults accounted for nearly 60% of marijuana-related cases before the state's general districts and circuit courts. An analysis of marijuana-related code citations in the state's court system concluded. So despite Black people only accounting for 20% of the state's population, there's 60% of the cases.
That is appalling.
It is appalling.
So, I think that's the biggest thing that I'm glad we're talking about with this is that, you're sitting there smoking your weed, but you're going, wow, there's a lot of people in prison for this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Here I am buying it legally.
Yeah. No, and the Legal Defense Fund tells us that Black and Latinx people have endured significantly disproportionate suffering because of these laws. Despite using cannabis at a slightly lower rate than their white counterparts, Blacks are roughly 4 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis. In 2018, 89% of the more than 2,000 offenders who were federally sentenced on cannabis charges were people of color. 43% of all drug arrests that were made were cannabis arrests. Today, many Black Americans continue to sit in jail under mandatory life sentences. So the legal pot industry, it's run primarily by white men, is projected to bring in $45 billion in 2024. So folks of color sitting in jail, while primarily white people are reaping profits. So efforts to legalize recreational cannabis, they're just a first step in addressing these pervasive injustices. So, we now have an industry that's legal in a lot of states, but as we can see, people of color are still being left behind or worse, left to languish in prison. So I covered the arrests. Now I want to talk about the industry, which is booming. In 2022, non-white ownership of cannabis businesses shrank to 15.4% from 20.7% in 2021. So this doesn't surprise me when you look at overall small business ownership in the United States. I think roughly 64% of small businesses are owned by white people. They just have more capital. Historically, systemic racism.
Yes.
We're not going to go too deep into this, but the Minority Cannabis Business Association, the MCBA, they put out a report that found that the number and efficacy of state social equity programs does not reflect the express commitment to achieving equity through cannabis. And we see that. I see that here in San Francisco. Social equity is super, super important to us. We have incredible programs that promote equity-owned cannabis dispensaries. If I'm not mistaken, I think we have a moratorium on establishing our permits for new dispensaries right now, with the exception of equity businesses or equity cannabis shops. So, and the equity component is anybody who's been adversely impacted by the war on drugs. And there are a number of different factors that are inherent in that. So it's cool. I'm glad to be in a city like that. We have a lot of work to do, but we've done some good stuff. 2 DAs ago, February 2019, George Gascon actually expunged over 9,000 marijuana charges. Pretty cool. We have all these free expungement clinics, which is rad because hiring a lawyer to expunge your record is super expensive. And so, I mentioned the Cannabis Equity Program. Not only is the application, the permit fee waived, but there's also all these incubator partnerships and, free rent space for 3 years. We're really, really working to change things here. There's still more work to do. Could we be doing things better? Absolutely. But we're starting. So, and then, in my industry, we promote all these jobs in the cannabis industry.
Right on.
And a huge focus is making sure that people of color are not just doing security at the door, which for so long was so often what you saw when you went to a dispensary. Typically, the only people of color were working security. Definitely working to change that, which is cool. So you may be asking yourself, why the fuck is anyone still opposed to legalizing weed and why, right? We see the financial benefits of legalizing weed. We see how owning dispensaries has the potential to level the playing field. There's all these good things, right? Lower crime rates, or at least not crime associated with weed.
Yeah.
Why the fuck are people opposed? So a lot of the arguments are kind of flawed. You know, some of them hinge on protecting children and teens, which is kind of hilarious to me when I think about how deleterious the impact of drinking alcohol is on everybody, not just teenagers. But, you know, it's far more harmful than weed. And a lot of the same people who are like, you know, wagging their finger and saying weed is bad have absolutely no problem with alcohol being legal. And I'm not saying alcohol should be legal. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. You get judged mercilessly in this country if you die from substance use disorder.
Yes.
If you die from diabetes associated with consuming incredibly unhealthy
you
food
get a
or heart
ribbon.
disease.
There's a race I can run for you.
Right. Or at least you're not personally condemned for your choices, right? But there's still all choices.
Yes.
And the overconsumption of anything can lead to, as you said, as we talked about, negative physiological and psychological effects. So I'm going to deviate a little bit. I just want to talk about alcohol a bit. Again, I'm not opposed to, I'm not opposed to alcohol consumption in moderation.
We're talking about abuse.
We're talking about abuse.
Yeah.
And not even just abuse, driving related accidents.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk about the stats on this. So a couple of facts here. Government report shows that alcohol abuse caused nearly 13% of deaths in Americans under 65 between 2015 and 2019. The stats were even more grim among younger adults in the U.S., aged 20 to 49. Alcohol abuse was the cause for 20% of deaths. I just lost a friend 2 months ago. She was 40. And it was all alcohol related for the most part. So, more than a quarter, as I mentioned or alluded to, more than a quarter, 25% of all traffic related deaths, direct result of alcohol impairment. Opposition hinges on, we're going back to opposition on weed. Sorry, I must have been high when I wrote this. So as we can see, alcohol... Look, as a parent, if I had to make a choice, is my kid going to smoke weed once a week or is my kid going to go out and get shit can wasted off alcohol once a week? I prefer the former, not the latter.
Yeah. Well, I even feel harder about texting and driving.
Yes.
These are things we have to understand what's going on in our brain when we do these things.
Yes.
And if you look at the science and this made doing a lot of the research hard too, because a lot of the research is funded by abstinence-based program. And so you really have to go to chemistry and really look at what's going on. Look at actually both sides.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think there's a lot there's a lot of hypocrisy going on and again, follow the money trail.
Absolutely. So, it's kind of funny, some of the stereotypes, the extreme stereotypes that are out there. And this is also from that same Pew Research. There's this 84-year-old man who's quoted and he's like, it gets too many people on drugs. It would put too many drugs on the street. We don't need that. First of all, there are already a ton of drugs on the street. Second of all, that gateway drug bullshit is bullshit. It's bullshit. And so,
I smoke a lot of weed. I've never done heroin.
Yes, exactly. I've never felt, of all the drugs I've done.
Judgment if you do.
Exactly. I've never felt compelled to take it to that extreme, right?
Yeah.
And so, there's another thing too. I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's relevant. And I think the evidence, the stats support this. But let's talk about, drug arrests and the subsequent incarceration. They're big business for the prison industrial complex and for the law enforcement community. Drug offenses actually still account for the incarceration of over 350,000 people in this country. That amounts to 1 in 5 people being locked up for a drug offense. Now, granted, that's not all weed, but it's still drugs.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is weed. So,
prison's free labor.
Prison is free labor. Yeah. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery except in prisons.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot to be gained financially from continuing to, keep weed illegal at the federal level, et cetera. So I know we covered a lot here. I know we were all over the place. We kind of covered the points associated with marijuana that are kind of the most salient to us. You might be out there going, but wait, what about this, this, and this? Yeah, all that shit's important, but there's only so much we can fit into 45 or 50 minutes. So do your own research. And I think, in the spirit of our boy Jerry Springer, we want to give a final thought. So I think we should do a final thought at the end of every show.
I think we should too.
That should be how we incorporate Jerry's legacy, the good parts of his legacy, into our show. So, marijuana is a drug. And in our opinion, a minimally harmful drug, but it's a drug nonetheless. And just like prescription drugs, which often have far more side effects and addictive properties than pot, precautions have to be taken.
Absolutely.
Look, pot isn't for everyone. Some people react really badly or have conditions that contribute to weed adversely, causing adverse side effects. Kids probably shouldn't take the pot, ideally, but we know it's going to happen. So let's focus on harm reduction instead of abstinence-only education. Marijuana has a lot of amazing benefits. As I said, I take 5 milligrams every night. I don't smoke because I have asthma. So any, that argument about, it being harmful to your lungs, of course it is.
Yes.
Anytime you're smoking, it's harmful to your lungs. But guess what? I eat it. All good. As I said, when I have 2 drinks, I feel like shit the next day. I take my 5 milligrams of weed at night.
Dad weed.
I feel great. Weed works for me. It works for Carolyn. It doesn't necessarily mean it works for everyone, and that's okay. As an adult living in San Francisco, as I said, I'm stoked that I can walk into a dispensary and not only buy weed, but a lot of them have lounges where I can sit and I can smoke with other people and make it a social thing.
Amsterdam.
It's like Amsterdam, except I'm not a social smoker. Don't fucking look at me when I smoke. I do that shit in the house. So when I smoke, and that's just it. We're adults making decisions about what we decide to put into our bodies.
And
it works it works for me. It works for Carolyn. It works for millions of people. So let's stop demonizing it, folks. For those of you out there that even still demonize it, and I know none of those people are listening to our show.
Probably not.
No, you're all fucking stoners. And we love you.
Be safe.
Be
420
safe.
rules.
420 for life, but, do it responsibly. And as always, our push for giving us a good review, write a review, give us 5 stars, all that bullshit. We're on TikTok now. We have a YouTube channel that we seldom maintain. I promise we're going to get better at that shit. We're on Instagram. We're on the Facebook, even though that makes us really old.
So you get a MySpace page?
We need a MySpace page. So there's lots of places to find us, you guys. So, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Cool. Bye.
Bye.